welcome back to Beauty in the Bookcase, where we take a book and we make a look. In today's video, I'll be turning into Kaya, the Marsh Girl, as we talk about Delia Owens's Where the Crawdads Sing. So, Delia Owens is an American author and a zoologist, and while this may sound like an odd combination, her background in zoology and biology actually play a big role in this book, where she presents the marsh and all the little creatures who live in there. Having grown up in Georgia, she moved to Africa with her then husband and their stepson. And while she was there, some controversies have arisen because her ex-husband and her stepson are accused of the controversial murder of a poacher. So with all of that, there's also controversy because it's said that Delia and her family had some, I guess, sort of like some backward views and some very patronizing views towards the people of Africa. So they kind of infantilized them, which I thought was interesting just because two of the most important characters in Where the Crawdads Sing are, an African-American couple. So I don't know the validity of these claims. I've just seen them. So I wanted to include those as to be upfront if you don't want to support a person who has been accused of sort of infantilizing and sort of not treating the people of Africa very well. That is a rumor that has been put out there. I do want to give a very, very quick warning before I get started. So today's video does talk about abuse, mental health, and domestic violence and alcoholism. So if any of these topics are triggering, viewers' discretion is advised. So in the first chapters of Where the Crawdads Sing, we get to learn a lot about Kaya really quickly. She's our main character. So Kaya is basically slowly abandoned by her entire family. The first one to leave is their mother, and then her brother and the rest of her siblings. And they all leave her with their dad. And so their dad had been in the war, and so he had a lot of PTSD. And with that came alcoholism as a way to cope, which led to a lot of violence in the home. And it used to be sort of spread out throughout the family, but of course, when everyone left, Kaya was afraid because she figured she was gonna have to face the brunt of it. But she finds a way to sort of take care of herself and just avoid her dad. But it's obviously very sad and very difficult to see such a young girl abandoned by her entire family with the knowledge that she was gonna have to live with an abuser. So as the story continues, Kaya has to learn how to take care of herself, especially once her father also disappears. So she has to learn how to cook, and she also has to find a way to provide for herself because all she used to have before was the disability check that her dad got from the military. But of course, now that he's gone and so is the money, she starts collecting mussels and smoking fish from the marsh and bringing it over into town to sell to a man named Jumpin. So Jumpin is an African-American man who runs what would be now sort of like a gas station / quick shop. So it's more of a shack in which he'd fill like canisters with petrol, and then you could buy just the regular stuff you get at a convenience store. So they quickly bond, and so his wife, learning that Kaya was wearing clothes that didn't fit her, or she didn't have a whole lot of stuff, and they kind of figured she was alone even though she never really said it. So they start sort of collecting stuff from their community and from their churches and bringing it to Kaya. Now Kaya continues making a living by selling and collecting mussels and the smoked fish because she doesn't really have an education. She went to school one day in her life and she was made fun of. And the reason was that she was known throughout the entire town as the Marsh Girl. Nobody really gave her a name, nobody respected her. Parents would pull their kids away from her, and there was just no respect. And there was just no consequences to her being made to feel bad and being bullied and abused by the community. So she never went back to school. She just kept hiding from like social services. And yeah, so she has to figure things out for herself. However, while out on the marsh one day, Kaya, she doesn't really meet this person. They had known each other since they were children, but she didn't really remember him. But she bumps into a guy named Tate. Now, Tate used to be friends with one of her brothers, and so they knew each other from childhood. And they slowly start developing a relationship. It starts out as a game because Kaya liked to collect shells and feathers and nests and all sorts of things from the marsh because she liked studying them and painting them. And so he started off by essentially leaving feathers, like unique feathers for her, on a stump that was in front of her house. And so a lot of their relationship starts to grow from there, from him leaving these gifts for her. And it continues to grow as he teaches her how to read, and she falls in love with biology because it gives her another way to connect with the marsh and with the stuff that she's interested in. So she's able to sort of continue connecting to what she loves, her marsh, by learning more about biology. So she starts writing about all the specimens that she has on her wall and all that type of stuff. And as they get closer, they end up falling in love. The problem here was that, of course, Tate had plans. He wanted to go to college because he wanted to be some type of biologist as well. He wanted to do something science related. And so he ends up also leaving Kaya because he's just gonna go to college. And that's really hard on her because she's already been so abandoned by everyone else. And she, you know, it's not like she can just go over to Mabel and Jumpin's place all the time. So when she loses Tate, which was her kind of like only daily interaction, it's really tough on her because she's back to being by herself. So as Kaya grows into her own, she continues with her love of the marsh, but she also meets a guy by the name of Chase Andrews. If that sounds like a douchebag name, it's because he is. What can I say about Chase? Chase is your typical has-been football star, like high school football quarterback guy who, you know, kind of peaked in high school, and his entire like grown-up personality is like encompassed by having been this great quarterback. And so, you know, everyone in the town loves him. His parents are like kind of ritzy people, and I don't know, he's just a privileged white boy essentially. And he ends up meeting up with Kaya, and they start a relationship that I don't know entirely if it's honest on his behalf or not, but they have a relationship until he ends up also leaving her. But as Kaya is left behind and Tate comes back, she actually gets offered through Tate and some of his acquaintances a contract to write books about the marsh because there's not a lot of information out there, and who better than her, who lives there, who studied these creatures her whole life. So she actually becomes like a best-selling author, but her life is interrupted again because she is accused of committing a crime involving Chase. So it's really hard because as you go through, you're rooting for her, but you see all these obstacles and all this pain and abandonment that Kaya has to face, and it's really difficult. So as usual, I'm gonna start off with the things that I didn't necessarily like, and then I'll go into the stuff I really liked about the book. So one of the things that I struggled with was, as the book progresses, there's certain sections in which Kaya is talking to Tate or her brother or other people where her language just seems a little too, I guess, advanced. And even if she's read a lot, it was weird because you started off with a character who spoke very much like, you know, a girl who grew up in the marsh in like a countryside and, you know, didn't have much of an education, and her family didn't have much of an education either. And then suddenly there's like this giant shift in which she at times becomes very eloquent, and it didn't feel authentic to me. It kind of just, it just didn't seem to fit with her character, because she'd have moments where she would go back to talking like as a girl without much education and all that. So it was a little strange. So it would take me out at times, because I was like, well, I don't feel like she would talk this way, if I'm being quite honest. But yeah, that was kind of a weird, I mean, it's a small thing. It's not like, oh, how dare you, it makes me incapable of reading this book. Another issue I had with it is that her relationships all feel very like cliche romantic comedy kind of thing. You know, they just don't feel realistic. It's not really like very, well, Tate is a bit more realistic of a male character. Tate at times just sounds so like, you know, The Notebook. And I don't know, I kind of struggle with just romances that don't sound authentic and that don't sound like characters who don't talk like normal people. And I know dialogue is hard to, like, good dialogue is hard to write, especially when it comes to like the romantic relationships, but I just couldn't. There were moments where I was like, no man in the history of time has ever actually said these words or spoken or acted like this. And I don't know, it just felt very cheesy. And I mean, again, it's a matter of personal taste. It's just not the type of thing that I like to read. So there was that. And then my only other issue was, this is kind of a spoiler, but it's not like the most central thing. Is just kind of this random plot point where throughout the story, Kaya keeps like randomly quoting these poems by a poet called Amanda, I think it's Hamilton or something like that. Something with an H, anyway. It feels very intrusive and very annoying, and at the end you end up finding out that she's actually been the person, like she's actually been Amanda all along, so the poems she would recite were her own. But it was just kind of random. Like there was no, there's a comment at the beginning of the novel that's kind of like, oh yeah, when she started learning how to read, she got really into poetry and like made up poems while she was out on the marsh. But it's never touched again until the end. So I just thought it was kind of a random plot point, especially because you already have her writing anyway. So I don't know, it was just unnecessary, I guess. But now let's talk about the stuff that I did like, because I did enjoy this book. Because I really did enjoy this book. I think one of my favorite things about it is just how it has such a heavy focus on mental health and abuse, and like the link between those two. So mental health plays a huge role in this story. Not only, you know, do you have Kaya dealing with abandonment issues throughout the whole thing, but she's also the victim of abuse, as I mentioned earlier, both physical and emotional, not only from her father, but also just from people in the community. You know, she was ostracized just for something that she had like zero control over, which was being born in the marsh. Like, she doesn't get to choose where she's born. She doesn't get to choose who her family is, or, you know, how much education she can have and all that type of stuff. Her father as well, you know, the reason why he's such a violent character and the reason why he drinks is because he, like many people really, is a victim of, you know, the PTSD that comes from having been in the military, having fought in a war. There's a lot of darkness that accompanies him, and he doesn't really have the right tools or the right support to get the help that he so clearly needs. So when you have moments in which he's actually kind and loving and a good father to Kaya, and you can see him trying, you can see, I don't want to excuse it because you should never like abuse your children or your family or anyone, obviously. But you can see that he's just a product of an environment he had to live in, and it sucks because his kids and his wife are the ones who have to pay the price for what he had to survive. Her mother as well, later you find out she's been dealing with a lot of depression and guilt and just generally struggling, and it's very sad and it's very real, you know, as a victim of abuse herself and as somebody who sort of, you know, left her family. She is filled with guilt, and she really, really struggles with that for the rest of her life. There's such a huge sadness over this story that I think a lot of us can relate to. We can relate to that loneliness and those feelings of abandonment and of just feeling lonely and unlovable and abandoned and powerless, really. But that's where found family takes a huge role in this story. I mean, Jumpin's relationship and Mabel's relationship to Kaya is, I would say, one of the strongest prose for this book. It's beautiful. I mean, they had no reason to care for this girl. She was marginalized already by society, so it's not like anyone would judge them for not helping her because no one else was. She was, you know, she wasn't of, they came from different worlds to an extent, you know. She didn't belong to them, and they were also facing their own hardships as African Americans in a very white community that sort of forced them into like their own sector and whatnot. So they didn't have to do everything they did for Kaya, and her value of that relationship is huge. She appreciates so much that people who didn't have to take any responsibility for her at all chose to do so. They chose to care for her and to see her and to encourage her, and it's so beautiful. And you know, Tate as well sort of comes to his senses in a way and realizes that Kaya can fit into his world and she can fit into his life, and he empowers her to do something that, as a person who never went to school except for one day, she would have never thought it was possible. And her editor as well becomes a huge driving factor for Kaya. He's very encouraging. He's a huge fan of her work, and he's always so supportive and wanting to bring her out of the shell that she's been living in for all these years, and to really let her grow and blossom into a person so that she can see that she does belong and that she does have a right to live outside of the marsh and to be somebody. And yeah, I think just seeing those relationships also really spoke to me, because I do have people in my life who have taken me in and who have seen past other things people have said about me, or you know, they've given me a chance and they've seen me at my lowest and they've still been loving and they've still been supportive, and having that found family has really, really helped me through some really tough times. But if there's anything this book is really about, it's about like classism. It really is. It's about how Kaya is marginalized by society, as I said, for something that she can't control. And it's a whole story about how an entire town thought they were too good for this girl who was, you know, left to fend for herself. And nobody took care of her. Nobody checked on her. Nobody cared. They just kept making fun of her whole life and turning on her. And it's so, so sad. And you can see that that's a huge reason why Jumpin' and Mabel bond with her, because of course, who better than them understands what it's like to be marginalized by the town that they live in and to have to fight for respect and for a place in the community. So I think by being two marginalized groups, they sort of recognized that they needed to take care of each other. Because Kaya throughout is always trying to like repay them and make them proud and just be grateful and appreciative for all the things that they've given her. So I think they just see somehow a lot of each other. All in all, really, I think just seeing Kaya be able to overcome all the struggles and the hurdles that were put in front of her because of where she was born and making something of herself despite not having people there for her, aside from Jumpin' and Mabel, is just a reminder really of human dignity and how we all have a right to a dignified life, how we all have a right to live and to be treated with respect, and how really we just need to be given an opportunity. Everyone needs to be given an opportunity to succeed and to make something of themselves. So here are my final thoughts. In general, I think this is a really good book. I think it definitely deserves a lot of the praise that it got. Do I think it's important to keep in mind the allegations? Yes, I think we have to be responsible readers. We have to be responsible consumers. And when we get involved in supporting anyone, we really need to be aware that there are people who are harmed, and we need to acknowledge harm that is or could have been done. But I still think the book deserves its praise. I would give it probably a 7.5 out of 10. Still has not topped A Gentleman in Moscow. I think that's been my favorite thing I've read this year so far. But I still think it was a great book. I think it has a lot of really important messages about abuse and about classism. And you can't help but fall in love with the main character, and that's really a huge thing. And you know, David Foster Wallace said that good literature should disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed. And I know there's like a version of that going around attributed to Banksy. I would just like to say that David Foster Wallace said it first. The quote is actually his. But really what I want to say is that this book does a really, really good job of reminding us of things that we don't want to think about. And I think I agree with that sentiment, and that's always how I aim to write. And those are the things that I like to read, are things that remind us that there's a lot of things in this world that aren't fair, and that we need to work towards giving people like Kaya an opportunity, and just really look into our communities and find the Kayas in them, to let them succeed and to give them the help that they need. All right, thank you so much for watching. If you like it, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and leave a comment. If you have any recommendations for me, make sure to leave them in the comments below. If you recreate this look, make sure to tag me on Instagram to read some of my own work. I also have a link to my website down in the description below, and I will see you guys next time when we talk about the book Internment.